hope you enjoyed the lunch break. We're going to start now our afternoon sessions full of very interesting discussions, starting from the next one on the new information frontlines. So recent investigations have shown how the internet infrastructure is the new frontline to counter disinformation, domain name abuses, registrars, servers. This infrastructure is central in accessing information. What do we know about it? Is there accountability in the field? Can we sanction and imagine future policies to prevent malicious actors from abusing it? So these are just a few of the very interesting questions that this discussion is going to approach, moderated by Emma Mesurier on stage. Emma is Managing Director of Next Level Initiatives, supporting independent media in Central and Eastern Europe. She's also a board member of DisinfoLab, luckily for us. Previously, she worked as head of impact at Mayday Rescue, an incubator for the White Helmet Rescue Organization in Syria. She has an experience as a former British diplomat working for 10 years in the Middle East, where she thought, among other things, to counter on and offline efforts to hostile state and non-state actors in the cognitive space. So the stage is yours, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How are we doing? Yeah, we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome back after lunch. Thank you for that introduction, very comprehensive introduction. Yes, my name is Emma Limonier, and I'm here joined by Kevin Limonier, Associate Professor at the French Institute of Geopolitics at the University of Paris 8, and Alexandre Alaphilippe, one of the founders who you probably know of DisinfoLab, who's been working on some of the largest investigations that the organization has conducted. I think I want to leave as much time for these two speakers to really get into the meat of this subject, because it's both a little bit technical, but also essential and different to, I think, what we normally discuss when we think about disinformation and the information environment. So if we put this in context of Russia's war in Ukraine, we've seen the hardening of territorial borders over the last few months. And that looks like everything from the spectrum of diplomatic tools, looking at visa policies, information policies, looking at RT and Sputnik, previously delineated or undelineated, ungoverned internet territory, which I think has been one of the struggles of the last few years for many of us in this community, has now become something different and threatens to evolve yet again into something more complex that perhaps we haven't yet fully understood and grasped the implications of. So as we start to look at vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure, thinking primarily around energy security, etc., the same thing needs to be considered within the cognitive space. To do this, we need to understand what is the cognitive critical infrastructure through which all of our information flows, and therefore which has become and will continue to be the battleground within the information space. So if I can hand over, please, to Kevin to begin and set out what this landscape looks like and help us to kick off this discussion. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I will discuss a topic that is quite new today, the way of thinking internet infrastructures as some critical cognitive infrastructure. And this is a formula we invented together with Emma while we were discussing about how to figure out this presentation today. I don't know how it works. Okay, the big button, of course. So when we talk about internet infrastructure, we used to think about material critical infrastructure. You saw that last week in Marseille, a cable was cut for an unknown reason that slowed down the internet in various parts of the world. This is what critical infrastructure looks like usually. But there is another type of infrastructure, of internet infrastructure, which are non-material infrastructure. We call them internet protocols, or just simply protocols. That is to say, the set of complex standard languages computers speak among them in order to carry our data all around the internet. Because if two computers don't speak the same language, they won't understand each other, and neither will the users understand each other. So basically, internet is a set of standardizations, protocols that have for a long time been seen as something non-strategical, non-political, something deeply technical, the realm of IT guys, I would say. But in this presentation, I will argue the contrary. I will try to show you how internet protocols are a political issue, a geopolitical issue, and not only for carrying flux of data, but also for carrying informations. And that's why we just try to forge this idea of critical cognitive infrastructure. So let's be a little bit more concrete here. This is how the internet works. Internet is what we call a network of networks. That's basically its name, internetworks. All the subsystems of the internet are what we call autonomous systems, ASs. These autonomous systems, you have thousands of them, can be internet providers, cable providers, connection providers, banks, ministries, etc., big infrastructure that have their own autonomous, I would say, policy of routing. And these infrastructure, these autonomous systems, these entities, these, I would say, non-material entities, they don't exist. You cannot touch them, okay, in the physical space. They are linked together by a protocol we call the Border Gateway Protocol. The Border Gateway Protocol is a kind of a glue of the internet. It's that what sticks the things together. And when I want to send a pack of data, at the origin I wanted to make you the demonstration in live, but I don't have any access to a computer, so you will have just to believe me. But if I want to send a pack of data from here to Moscow, for example, it won't go on a straight line, okay? My pack of data will go through various routers, and it will go through various autonomous systems until it reaches its destination. What we would have seen if I had made kind of what we call a trace route, that is to say, tracing the route of a pack of data on the internet, we would have seen probably that my pack of data would have been carried from Brussels to Frankfurt. In Frankfurt, it would have been carried from probably Berlin, and then Berlin, Smolensk, and Smolensk, Moscow. And in all these towns, a different autonomous system would have carried it. You have three types of autonomous system: tier 1, tier 3, tier 2, and tier 1. Usually, when I send a pack of data from my computer to, let's say, the website of the Kremlin in Moscow, it will go through various autonomous systems, and then eventually you won't be able to trace it after a few jumps, because the website of the Kremlin will protect how it is connected to the internet. But that's another story. So why am I telling you that? Because it means that all the autonomous systems of the world are not connected each other. They are connected each other for geographical, economical, political reasons. There is no, for example, French providers directly connected to Russian providers, because it doesn't make sense. Between them, you have continental cables, you have what we call internet service providers of internet service providers. I mean, some kind of organization you cannot pay as an individual, but the big organization pay them to carry the data all around the world. And once you understand that all the autonomous systems of the world are not connected to each other, it means that internet has a shape. It has a geopolitical shape. It has something. You can represent it, for example, through a graph like this, which is a kind of map of all the autonomous systems of the world and all the BGP agreements of the world. What is very interesting on this graph is that there is a geographical consistency. I mean, all the autonomous Russian autonomous systems are in the same, I would say, area of the graph. not because we put them there, but because the algorithm you used just put them there because they are more linked between each other than with the rest of the graph. You can see the Ukrainian network. And between the Ukrainian and the Russian network, you can see a kind of small gray, pink and orange cluster, which is in fact the network of Crimea. This picture of the internet, which is not complete for many reasons, but whatever, was taken maybe 2 or 3 years ago, so way before the invasion of Russia, of Ukraine, so far. And, sorry. And what we can see here is very interesting because we have the technical traduction of a geopolitical phenomenon, which is the Crimean network being progressively swallowed by the Russian networks. And we can see here, of course, for example, the network of the US Department of Defense, which is very far from the center of the network, obviously, because it's not connected to the rest of the world via many points for obvious security reason. And it's interesting because there is a connection between Ukraine and the network of the US Department of Defense here. So here, what I want to say to you is that this geopolitical shape can be manipulated. And what we see with the research we are conducting now is that analyzing autonomous systems and BGP protocols can help us to understand how some state actors and non-state actors do use internet protocols as a weapon for controlling some territories. The map you are seeing here is a map that we did for a publication, an academic publication. It was a year or two ago, so before the invasion. But what we saw here is that when you send a pack of data from Dnipro to Moscow, or from Donetsk to Moscow, that is to say, from two different sides of the front line that existed till 2014, your pack of data won't take at all the same route. When you are connected to the occupied territory, your data go through Russia directly, not through Ukraine, of course. And when you are connected, when you are in Ukrainian territory, your data go through Europe and make a big turn to go to Moscow because there is no direct connection. It doesn't mean that there is no direct physical connection. It means that there is no direct logical connection, no BGP connection, because Russia has established a real strategy about territorial occupation, which is also a digital occupation. Rerouting the routers is a part of their strategy for controlling what goes in and what goes out from the territories they control. And for a geographer like me, that is something quite fascinating because there is a kind of, it's like, you know, a reflection of the physical space and the issues of the control of the physical space by an army in the digital space. And here, as you can see on the on the right for you, is various snapshots of how networks of Crimea, I was talking about, and the network of Donbass has been progressively detached from the Ukrainian network. So all the Donbass and all the Crimean ASs, autonomous system, are progressively swallowed by the Russian network. And we can see it through time. So you see here May 2014, November, etc., etc. And we can see them just joining the Russian network. So, but what is the link with, I would say, cognitive and information thing? Well, if you see what is happening now in Ukraine, this is the same system as we noticed way before the war, the invasion. What we can notice now is that when there is a territory occupied by the Russians, they just disconnect it from the Ukrainian network, of course, and reconnect it to the Russian network. But what is the information political consequence of such a thing? Since February, Russia blocks almost every independent information resource, as you say, and they are enforcing a real, I would say, information firewall between them and the rest of the world. That is to say that when you are in Russia, or when you are in these territories and you don't know how to use a VPN, for example, well, you are condemned to just face the truth, that the version of the truth that the Kremlin wants you to know. So the infrastructure manipulation of the networks becomes a information, cognitive manipulation that leads people to change the way they get informations. And the map you see here is a map of latencies in all of Ukraine from one point, which is Kramatorsk, in a region that is still that is controlled by the Ukrainian army. And what we can see here is that all the points you see are probes of a network called Atlas. It's a kind of, I would say, meteorological network of probes of the internet that is used for making a lot of telemetries of the network. But we use it in geopolitics in order to understand how countries and how areas are connected to each other. The greener a point is, the faster the signal will go from Kramatorsk, the small dot you see here, to any of the dots on the map. So what we can see is that there is an optimal connection from Kramatorsk to the rest of Ukraine, of non-occupied Ukraine, because you can almost here see the territories occupied by the Russians. They are all in orange. Why? Because when you send a pack of data from Kramatorsk to Sevastopol, for example, it will go around, like in the map I showed you. It will go through Frankfurt, etc., etc. So this is a way to understand by maps, by geography, and by territory, how the internet works, how it is political, geopolitical, and how it becomes a cognitive issue, because it has a real impact on how people do get information and so on. A last example is the reachability of various systems in the Central Asian, the countries of Central Asia, all the STAN countries. Here, it might not be obvious for you, but we did a ping from all the probes, still Atlas probes, from Atlas probes to some platforms, Google, Facebook, Yandex and VK. Yandex is the Russian Google, VK the kind of a Russian Facebook, if I can say. And what we can see, well, it's not very visible, but once again, you will have to believe me, that reaching Russian resources in Central Asia is much more, it's faster than reaching Western resources. That's obvious for geographical reasons, because the servers of Google and Facebook are very far from Central Asia. They just have some cache in a cache server in Bishkek. But when you are in Central Asia, it's much more convenient to use Russian platforms than Western platforms for obvious reason of reachability, rapidity, etc., etc. So there is also a kind of cognitive dependence for these countries, which are still completely dependent on Russia for their connectivity, because down south of this region, what do we have? We have the Pamir, no cables. We have Afghanistan, no cables. We have Iran, cables, but still very controlled, and we have Xinjiang, and there are cables, but they are not used for the moment. So here is another example of what we can see about how protocols are political and how protocols are a matter for, I would say, information and getting online information. So just to conclude, to make a small conclusion, for a long time, studying protocols and structures of the internet has been what we call a matter of the lower layers of cyberspace. This is the realm of IT guys and all these things. And there are also the upper layer of cyberspace, which we are discussing here, that is to say how information travel across the world. But now I think we are at the point of history and of development of the network where the both meet, and that we cannot ignore how the internet is made, how its infrastructure works, in order to invent some kind of circumventions for avoiding what is already happening. This is a kind of splitting of the internet in Russia, in China, and in various regions of the world. And maybe that's a mission for European Union, I don't know, to try to keep the internet together. Thank you.
See if we can manage this one again. Thank you very much, Kevin. Fascinating introduction into the fragmentation of the information space, and certainly how the two very different realities can be experienced within Russia and occupied Ukraine in this particular instance, as well as Central Asia and some of the fledgling republics, as we start to see the continued fragmentation and risk of destabilization of those republics. Closer to home, Alexandre, would you mind taking us through, conversely, how the technical infrastructure of the internet has been exploited and manipulated as a threat against us in our own cognitive space, and take us through your investigation, your very hard-hitting doppelganger investigation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everybody. I realize now that planning a session on internet infrastructure just after the lunch was quite a challenge. So I would like to thank you all for eyes open, and I would not blame anyone for an eye closed. Thank you, Kevin. I think what Kevin said in his presentation was very interesting, because it forces us to think about digital territories and thinking about the internet infrastructure, how we use it, these cables, these protocols, have actually an impact on how we see information, how we consume information. And what I'm going to talk about is mostly how also inside Europe, these infrastructure can be targeted and can be abused by malicious actors. So a few weeks ago, at the end of August, when we were all thinking that we're going to have a very nice and lazy September at DisinfoLab, came a request from a journalist from AFP saying like, oh, there is this case in Germany about fake media websites that are developed, and there is a paper published by ISD and T-Online. Could you provide a comment? And we did a very stupid mistake. We could have been very lazy and just send a comment about, yes, we saw that before and it's not good, etc. But we took the extra step to just look at the stuff, and that was a very bad idea. For our weekends or nights with colleagues, our families that asked us, why are you going back to that kind of things again? So the case was about a series of websites, most of them already uncovered by T-Online and ISD, that were working on this, you can see it like media clones, mostly targeting Germany, but not only, France, Italy, Baltic states, Ukraine were also targeted, the UK, where you arrived on a website, for instance, this Bild, that you know, it's a very famous German tabloid, and you arrived on the website of Bild, and you can see like everything is like Bild, but it's not Bild, because the Bild URL, so as Kevin was mentioning, the address to get access to Bild is bild.de for Deutschland, but this was bild.llc, for instance, or bild.vip. And what they did is like they bought these very specific domain names that were using Bild, and they created pages where they copied all the style of Bild. Like the weather was the same, the stock market was the same, the comments were the same. The only thing that was fake was the main story. And the main story was about how I don't know, because there were also videos like how a school is exploding in Bremen because people wanted to save gas, and it's very dangerous to save gas, you know, because you should not save energy, you should consume it directly from the pipeline, you know, that's how you should do it with energy. You had all the studies about now, because of saving energy, you don't have lights in the streets anymore, so people in bicycles are actually getting killed by cars because you cannot see them because there is no light anymore. Or you might have to buy candles to have heating at home this winter. So all of these narratives were present in this Bild website. We had Der Spiegel, 20 Minutes in France, ANSA, the Italian agency, The Guardian, and all of these, the particularity was, as you can see here, they were spread on Facebook mostly with this kind of news.bild.llc. And if you don't pay attention to that very little extension, which is 3 letters in the address, you actually get oriented towards a website of disinformation. And what is actually crazy on that is like what is called the top-level domain that Kevin touched upon. It's basically how to access information. So basically, for DisinfoLab, you would go to disinfo.eu. So, but you can buy, basically, there are 1,589 available extensions available on the market. So you can buy basically everything. And the scrutiny of what you can buy and who's buying for it is very low. Which means these people could buy build.vip without revealing who they were, how they paid for it. And nobody knows, beyond the companies that sold that domain name, who is behind it. What is crazy is that we found something around like, I'm talking about the authority of Virtual Road who also helped us, something like 58 domains, just by looking at when domains were bought, looking at the specific extensions. We can see like, for instance, Spiegel, LTD was an extension they used a lot, .vip was an extension they used a lot. They also used geographical extensions. You have extension that goes with towns or regions. So you have Kiev.ua, which is a sub-extension. So you can buy Kiev.ua, so you can buy specific stuff. They also did very smart stuff, is adding subdomain. So you look at the last one of Doppelganger, www-spiegel-de.spiegel.ltd. So when you see this, you actually have the impression it's spiegel.de, but it's not. So there was a very coordinated infrastructure here into buying these domain names, because malicious actors know that we tend to overlook this when we consume information online, and to put this information there. The issue with that is like, this was exposed not only by us, DFRLab did a fantastic report on that, ISD did a report on that, Facebook and Meta did a report on that. The issue with that is like, we have clear impersonation of media targeting domain name infrastructure. What happens after the exposure? Already after the first exposure of T-Online, new domain names bought. Exposure of DisinfoLab, DFRLab, Meta, ISD, 250 more domains bought. So we are taking with an operation that actually don't care to be caught, because they know they can keep doing this, because there is no scrutiny at all on that. There is nobody that is asking this website to shut down. So this is really how our own infrastructure that we actually are helping and are supporting, because we help the liberalization of the market, is actually not scrutinized at all and allowing malicious actors to take advantage. And to this, and to stop that, that's the question that's linked to the question I asked this morning. Like, who's going to take the next step to complain about these websites? To complain about the fact that there are possibly copyright infringements on these websites. There are GDPR infringements on these websites. So what are the next steps that we can do to make sure that we have some accountability on this? Because it's not the first case of domain name being used. 2017, same technique, lesoir.info, saying that Macron was supported as a candidate by Saudi Arabia. No attribution on that. On Doppelganger, we could have an attribution because videos were produced in GMT+8 region, which is in Siberia, Irkutsk region. But on many of these things, there is very complicated attribution, and nobody is taking the steps to actually go into enforcement of policies. We need to draw a line on when our infrastructure is abused, abusers should be sanctioned. That's an easy line to get.
So Alexandre, I think that's a great place to leave it, but I'm going to ask you a follow-up question in that case, which is, specifically, we talk about sanctions, and I mean, in these two presentations we're seeing, on the one hand, the challenge of how we have a regulatory infrastructure, and the question is, what does enforcement look like? How do we tie these malign activities in the online space to existing codes of practice, laws and regulations in the offline real world. If we can start with that, do you have any practical recommendations, and how do you see the way forward?
So I think first, this question of domain names was never in the equation of the code of practice of disinformation, or never in the equation of the DSA. So we're talking now about new regulation in Europe to actually being able to have access to data to researchers. I'm not sure the top level, and I'm thinking about under the authority of many people that know very more on the DSA and on this than me. I do not think that top-level domains and internet infrastructure never got into the discussion of the DSA or access to data or code of practice of disinformation. And that's something which we can do now. We cannot ask, at some point, everybody that registers something online to buy 1,500 extensions. Some of them are cheap, some of them are quite costly. No? If you want to buy a .xxx, which was usually made for pornography, it's expensive. I leave you with that thought. But I think that's the first thing. We need to enter this question. I think the second question is, how do we have the capacity to flag this? So we were discussing with Virtual Road at some point to be able to flag the domains in bulk. So basically, we have all the domains, we flag them. And actually, the technical experts told us, when I'm flagging them, I'm actually filling up a website, which I have my email address on it. And basically, what the companies will do, that they will inform the people that I made a complaint. I don't know who the complaint is going to, but my personal detail will be revealed online. So basically, you're making a complaint, you don't know who you're making the complaint, maybe directly to the Kremlin or anybody, and you actually reveal all the details to justify that you are right to do the complaint. So we're talking a lot about asymmetry at some point. So you have to do a lot of extra effort to actually let someone know that, and then the company has done their job. They let the people know what they want to do. It's up to them. So actually it's a good business. You do that kind of stuff, then you wait for people to flag you, and then you can harass them, because you have the email addresses. So we need to change that kind of mentality where it's about have to prove everything at some point. Inquiries could be launched, enforcement could be launched. There are copyright infringements. I remember, so I will share a very personal story. A few years ago, when I was very young, I was a political activist. I made some pranks, and I'm not very proud of them. One of the pranks I made, which was a political prank, was to buy a domain name with the name of a political opponent. Campaign starts. It was not the domain name that person was using. Campaign starts, and at some point, I make the prank. I just redirect, the domain I brought to somebody else. It took, no lies, 30 minutes to have the domain name blocked, to have my all accounts on the internet provider deleted with no capacity to access, and I've been sued for theft of identity theft. I've been cleared on that because there was no ground, of course. It took 3 years. 3 years of a prosecutor investigation for a very bad prank. When I see 300 domain names bought by Russia to do disinformation in Europe, and we're all jumping around to say disinformation is a big priority, I wonder, where is the prosecutor that prosecutes political pranks but does not prosecute Russia on that? So there are ways to get information, to know who paid for this, who's responsible for this, and to actually get enforcement and accountability of the people that are abusing that.
Does it work? Yes. Personally, as an academic, I'm not very good at finding solutions, but I will try. No, that's very interesting, because what Alexandre was talking about is another protocol of the internet, which is called the DNS, the Domain Name System. And what we're seeing here with all these problems and BGP, DNS, and other protocols of the internet, we're touching on to the core of how the networks work. And it works in a distributed way. There is no center There's no authority. There is ICANN, of course, the Internet Authority for Assignation Number, but they have no mandate of anybody, which raises a lot of juridical question. So I don't know how we could fix this, but the thing is, protocols of the internet are the kind of wild part of the cyberspace. There are even domain names, TLDs, from countries that do not exist anymore. I'm personally working on the case of the .su, Soviet Union DNS, that still exists today, despite the fact that ICANN wants it to be closed for years and decades, but it still exists. And there is no regulation at all for the .su, which is some kind of cyber zombie or something, okay, with no regulation and very interesting things to visit. But here we are. I mean, and I do agree, when you talk about the Digital Service Act, it's focusing on the upper layers of cyberspace, but all the infrastructure is meant to be independent, self-reliant, with no borders, with no powers issue at stakes. But we see that now it's not possible anymore to have that. So we still have to understand how we can regulate this space without doing like Russians or Chinese, that is to say, by enforcing some kind of very harsh measures for obliging people and operators to change their routes and change how they work. But that's a huge, well, that's a huge thing to do.
And it's a particularly huge thing to do at a time of decreasing international cooperation as well around this. So on that optimistic note, do we have any questions from the floor? Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask particularly about country-level, top-level domains, and what does having or not having one mean in terms of cybersecurity, but also in terms of cognitive security or information space, which is directly related to public perceptions. And I can't help but think about Kosovo, which for obvious reasons does not have a country-level, top-level domain. What does that mean for Kosovo's information security? Thank you.
I will try to answer this. Kosovo is a very interesting case because of the non-recognition of some countries, the independence. It means that it does not have any TLD, if I don't make any mistake, but I'm not. Well, yeah, you confirm. Okay, great. I trust you. But there is some cases like that where how can I say, some entities and countries do not have the keys and the way of dealing with establishing a TLD. So you will have some kind of strategies. For example, in the case of Yugoslavia, it's quite interesting because until 2011, there was a .yu for Yugoslavia, and then it was split into Serbia, Montenegro, etc., etc. But it was made under what former Yugoslavia looked like in 2005 or something like this. So everything that went after that was not taken into account. I mean, at least the last thing that was taken into account was the independence of Montenegro, but that's all. So yeah, that's a really big issue. But I don't really know how these countries. That's a good question, actually. How do they do? Well, here that's excellent question that needs to be answered.
Just on this, I think it's an excellent question, and we should be also aware and cautious about the fact that, you know, as we've seen, for instance, in maritime traffic, you know, to have some countries that are allowing also some kind of content because they want to be more attract more money. So I don't know if I'm a rogue state. I don't know. Let's not propose any new invasion, but let's say I'm a rock state, so my extension, my top level extension is .rs, rock state, and I say, okay, so basically I need to make money, so I decide in my regulation that I can accept any kind of website, so I can sell you some kind of space on my top level domain, which are very easy to, and let's say I don't have any kind of enforcement or know your customer policy to look at who's actually buying that. I don't care. You can pay me in cash, in cryptocurrency. I don't care, you know. So at some point, it's also setting the bar in Europe about what kind of thing we need to accept if you buy an online space, what kind of information you need to give, what kind of information you need to actually share with the top level domain that you are buying for. It's basically buying a house. When you buy a house, or when I'm also taking this, like in real life, when you set up a store, you know, you set up a store in the street, you have to go to do some kind of administrative acts, you know, you cannot set up the store and just like, oh, it's nice, I'm going to set up a store here, I don't have a company. No, you need to register a company. You need to do some administrative stuff, you know. So it should be the same with the internet, with information on space. If you are setting something up online, there should be some kind of accountability of who's setting it up. And if I'm upset as a consumer of this website, I need to have someone I can complain to.
And now it's even more complicated because the DNS is completely deregulated. We saw a lot of entities creating their top level, their domain, like for example .paris. We have in France .sncf, which they don't use, which is quite strange. It usually costs between 100,000 and 300,000 euros to create your own domain. So I could, if I were rich, I would create .kevin, for example, and host some kind of disinformation campaigns of all sorts. And the problem is that besides the TLDs of countries, which is pretty clear who owns what, there is this whole world of creepy domains, or not creepy. For example, my research center has a domain on .science, and .science is actually run by an organization that is a mailbox in Gibraltar, and that's all. So, but we don't know what is behind this. So that's how it works.
Well, that's immensely reassuring. Thank you. Unfortunately, this is an enormous subject, and in a sense, we've kind of covered only the very beginnings of two, I'd say, almost sort of diametrically opposed challenges in our own space and in the atomization of the information space or the cognitive space elsewhere. I want to thank you both so much for this and your insights. And are you available for questions in the break afterwards, in case there are more? Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your attention.